I put the paper aside and looked out the window of my house in Brownsburg. It was a surprisingly warm October day, a gift at 73 when the cold gets to your bones. My joints were aching from yesterday's work in the flower bed, where I was preparing the roses for winter. Ellen had always done the gardening, and I'd only been an apprentice. Now, for the third year in a row, I was on my own. The old house creaked and sighed, and so did I. We had both grown old. Once it had been noisy, Heather's laughter, Helen and me in the kitchen, music in the evenings. Now only the radio broke the silence and the occasional doorbell. Today was the day my grandson, little Elliot, was due. Heather, my only daughter, had often left him with me lately while she and her husband, as she put it, solved adult problems. The kettle whistled, snapping me out of my musings. I poured a teaspoon of brew into the cup and poured boiling water over it. Ellen always said I made tea the barbarian way, but for 45 years as a process engineer at the steel plant, I'd grown accustomed to a strong drink. This plant was my life. I started from the very bottom, then as a leading specialist, then at the pre-retirement age I consulted the young. The ringing of the doorbell interrupted the memories. Heather stood on the doorstep, elegant, trim, her dark blonde hair impeccably styled. Elliot was shuffling from foot to foot, clutching a tattered stuffed rabbit in his hand. "Hi, Dad." Heather kissed my cheek, spreading the scent of expensive perfume. "We won't be long. Reg and I have a meeting with a financial advisor today." I nodded, letting them into the house. Heather was always in a hurry. Even as a child, she was always in a hurry. Faster to grow up, faster to graduate high school, faster to get married. "Grandpa, look what I got." Elliot pulled a colored pebble out of his backpack. "It's a treasure. I found it in the school playground." "A real treasure," I smiled, squatting down in front of my grandson. Elliot was a carbon copy of Ellen. The same blue eyes, the same stubborn chin. "Elliot, don't bore Grandpa with your rocks." Heather tapped her heel impatiently on the floor. "Dad, I brought you groceries. And Reg and I think you need your roof fixed." I noticed the stains on the ceiling in the living room. "I can do it myself," I said. "I have everything I need in the garage." Heather grimaced. "Climbing on the roof at your age?" "Dad, be reasonable. We'll find a good handyman." I didn't say anything. It was useless to argue with my daughter. She always found the last argument. She was like me in that, not like soft-hearted Helen. "Reg also wanted to stop by over the weekend to look at your boiler," Heather added as she went into the kitchen and began to sort through the groceries. "He says that old models often explode. And by the way, Dad," she lowered her voice, "I was thinking, maybe you should rewrite your will. You know, just in case. Just to be on the safe side." I stared at my daughter. This was the third time she'd brought it up in recent months. "There's nothing wrong with the will," I answered calmly. "I'd updated it after Mom died." Heather froze with the milk carton in her hand. "What's in it?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "It's just the way it should be," I said evasively. "Nothing to worry about. In fact, I'd signed over the house and my life savings to Elliot on the condition that he would have access to the inheritance when he was 25. Until then, it was up to the guardian, my old friend Otis Humphrey, a retired lawyer we'd met when we were young and fishing. To Heather, I left only a small amount of money. After she'd hinted 3 years ago, shortly after Ellen's death, that I should think about moving to a smaller house, I'd begun to suspect that my daughter had her sights set on our family nest. "Mom always said the house would stay in the family," Heather continued, closing the refrigerator. "It's too big for one person, Dad. Reg and Elliot and I would be comfortable here. You could get a smaller place. Or, She paused. "There are some great retirement homes for the elderly. I've read about Sunny Hills. The facilities there are wonderful." I shook my head. "I'm fine here, and I'm doing quite well." Heather pressed her lips together, but didn't argue. "Okay, I have to go." She glanced at her watch. "I'll pick up Elliot at 7. And Dad, think about what I said." When the door closed behind my daughter, I sat down at the kitchen table. Elliot climbed into a nearby chair, dangling his feet. "Grandpa, are we going to go feed the ducks today?" "Sure," I smiled. "And then we'll make paper boats and float them on the water." The time with Elliot flew by. We walked in the park by the pond, then came home to bake cookies from Ellen's recipe. I showed my grandson old photo albums, and he listened with his mouth open to stories about how his mom hid a frog in his backpack when he was a kid, and how Ellen and I first met at a dance. At 7 o'clock, Heather reappeared. I noticed she was looking around the house more closely than usual. "Dad, your bathroom faucet is leaking," she said. "I know. I'll replace the gasket tomorrow. Also, the wooden frames in the living room are all cracked. It's going to be cold in the winter." "I have a space heater," I said. Heather sighed. "You're so stubborn, just like Silas's grandfather." She turned to her son. "Elliot, pack your things. We have to go home." After they left, the house was quiet again. I sat in my chair with a cup of tea, looking at the picture of Ellen on the mantelpiece. We met in '68 when I was only 16. Her family had moved to Brownsburg from Portland. She was the prettiest girl I'd ever seen, with a mop of reddish-brown hair and freckles. We married 5 years later. Ellen worked at the city library and I started a career in a factory. When Heather was born, we bought this house, a small but cozy 2-story mansion with a garden. This is where all our lives have been spent. Ellen died of cancer 3 years ago. I still woke up in the middle of the night, instinctively reaching out to her side of the bed. And each time, the emptiness reminded me she was gone. The first year after my wife's death passed like a blur. I hardly left the house, didn't answer the phone. Heather stopped by often, bringing food, urging me to go to the doctor. She really cared about me. But then something changed. Her visits became less frequent, and the topics of conversation increasingly centered on the house, the will, and my health. I remembered the first time my daughter talked about selling the house a few months ago. "Dad, it's a great neighborhood. You could buy a condo and a new building for that money and still have a decent amount of money left over," she had convinced me. "Heather, I'm not moving anywhere," I said firmly. Mom and I bought this house when you were born. Every corner of it is a part of our lives. But you're alone in a 2-person house. It's unsustainable. You grew up in this house too," I reminded you. "Remember how your mom and I used to mark your height on the door jamb? How we made you a swing set in the backyard?" Heather looked away. "Dad, I get it, but you have to look to the future. You're not getting any younger. What if you fall down the stairs? Who's going to help you?" I was hurt by her practical tone, as if I wasn't a father, but a problem to be solved. A week after that conversation, Reginald came over for lunch. I was never thrilled with Heather's choice. Reg worked as some kind of analyst for a technology company, wore fancy, thin, rimmed glasses, and talked about things I didn't understand well. Startups, investment portfolios, and bitcoins. He was 2 years older than Heather, but he seemed like a boy next to her, indecisive and dependent. During that lunch, Reg suddenly took an interest in my accounts. "You know, Patrick, it's a very good time to invest in real estate," he said as he served himself a second helping of casserole. "A colleague of mine knows a realtor. If you want, I can introduce you. He'll appraise your house and—" Reg," I interrupted him. "I'm not selling or investing anything." Heather threw her husband a warning glance. "Dad, Reg just wants to help." "You don't need to worry about such complicated things at your age." I felt real anxiety for the first time then. "At your age," and Heather repeated those words more and more often. It was as if my 73 years automatically made me incapacitated. The next day I went to see Otis Humphrey. He lived across town in an old house just like mine. We had met when we were young on a fishing trip and had been family friends ever since. Otis and his wife often came over for barbecues. He was a widower now, too. His Martha had died the year before Ellen. "Patrick," Otis hugged me on the doorstep. "It's good to see you. Come on in. I was just making tea." We sat in his cluttered office among books and files. Despite his retirement age, Otis sometimes consulted old clients. "You know, I've been thinking more and more about wills," I began after exchanging news. "Heather keeps bringing it up. And the house. She thinks I should sell it." Otis took off his glasses and wiped them with a handkerchief. "What do you think about that? I don't want to go anywhere. This is my house. It's Ellen's and mine. Everything here." Otis nodded understandingly. "What about a will? How do you want to dispose of the property?" I told him about my doubts and concerns. Ellen always said the house should stay in the family, for Heather, but lately, I've been hesitating for words. I'm afraid she'll just sell it as soon as I'm gone. It's just real estate to her. For me, it's a lifetime. Otis stared out the window for a long time. What do you think about your grandson? Elliot is how old now? 6. Maybe we should sign the house over to him, on the condition that he gets it when he grows up. That thought struck a chord with me. Elliot was so much like Ellen. I saw in him an extension not only of myself, but also of her. But until then, who will administer the estate? You could appoint a guardian, Otis said thoughtfully. Someone you trust. Not Heather if you have doubts. Would you be a guardian? Otis smiled. For an old friend? Of course. That same day we made a new will. The house and most of the savings would go to Elliot when he turned 25. Until then, Otis ran everything. Heather received only a small amount of money, enough to keep her from contesting the will, but nothing more. 2 months had passed since then, and with each passing day, I saw a change in my daughter's behavior. She started coming more often, bringing groceries I hadn't asked for, insisting on repairs here and there. Reg would come over with tools, inspecting the house, measuring things. One day I noticed him taking pictures of the rooms on his phone. Today's conversation with Heather about the will kept me on my toes. Something was going on in my daughter's life, and that something was causing her to bring up the subject of my house more and more often. That evening, just as I was about to go to bed, the phone rang. It was Heather. Dad, I'm sorry to call you so late. I was thinking, maybe Reg and Elliot and I could come up and visit you this weekend. Spend some time together. Help out around the house. There's something important we'd like to talk about. Sure, I answered, feeling vaguely uneasy. Come on, Saturday. Great. Heather's voice sounded unnaturally cheerful. And Dad, could you get those papers for the house? Reg wants to see if the paperwork is in order. I slowly hung up the phone. Something was definitely wrong. Over the past few weeks, the house had suddenly become the center of Heather and Reg's attention. It was as if they were evaluating it, probing it, preparing it for something. Before I went to bed, I pulled out an old box of Ellen's letters. We corresponded the first year I went into the Army. Each of her letters began the same way. My dear Patrick, I reread them over and over again after she died. You know, Ellen wrote in one of her letters, I dream of a house, a real one, ours, where our children will grow up, where we will meet our old age, a place that will be our refuge from all storms. We realized that dream. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood in Brownsburg. This is where Heather was born and raised. It's where I held Elliot's newborn in my arms. This is where Ellen spent her last days before being hospitalized. I couldn't and wouldn't part with these walls. But something told me Heather had already made the decision for me, and I needed to be ready. Saturday came suddenly, like everything unpleasant in this life. I woke up to the sound of my neighbor Benson's lawnmower. He always started his loud work at 8 in the morning sharp. The old mechanical alarm clock on the bedside table read 5 to 8, which meant that Benson was in a particularly active mood today. It was a clear fall morning outside the window. There weren't many days like this left in Brownsburg by mid-October. Soon the sky would be a dull gray shroud until spring. I stretched, feeling my joints ache. I'd spent most of the day yesterday in the garage fixing up an old dresser I wanted to give to Elliot. The boy loved it when I showed him my tools and taught him how to handle wood. You have to feel the wood, I told him. Every board has a story. I struggled to get out of bed. My morning stiffness had been getting worse lately. 50 years of working with metal, machines, and heavy weights was taking its toll on my health. Going down to the kitchen, I put the kettle on and took the eggs out of the fridge. Heather and her family were due to arrive for lunch, and I wanted to prepare for their visit. A phone call interrupted the usual morning routine. It was Heather. Dad, did you remember we're coming over? Her voice sounded tense. Of course not, I answered. I was just making breakfast. Oh, that's great. Listen, I'm thinking of bringing Elliot his new tablet. You have internet, right? I sighed. Heather, I'd rather Elliot not sit on a tablet when he visits me. We have board games, books. Heather snorted. Dad, you're the same as always. The world has changed. Kids do things differently now. Maybe, I didn't argue. But when he's with me, let him live in my world for a while. It's more interesting for both of us. There was silence on the other end of the line. Okay, Heather said finally. We'll be there at 1 o'clock. Dad, don't forget the deed to the house. Reg wants to see them. After breakfast, I decided to clean up the living room. Although I cleaned regularly, the house was slowly acquiring that elusive clutter that characterizes the homes of elderly people living alone. A book left on the arm of a chair, a cup on the mantelpiece, glasses lost among the papers. The cleanup took longer than I'd bargained for. By noon, I was exhausted, but the living room shone. Ellen would have been proud of me. I even arranged freshly cut asters from the backyard into her favorite vase. At exactly 1 o'clock, there was the sound of a car pulling up. I looked out the window. Reg was parking their brand new SUV in front of the house. The Caldwell family had not been frugal. Grandpa! Elliot was the first one in the house, throwing his arms around me. Hello, kid. I picked him up, feeling a sharp prick in my lower back. Wow, how heavy you've become. Dad, don't lift him. Heather came in next, holding 2 large bags. You'll strain yourself. I'm not such a wreck that I can't lift a 6-year-old, I replied, setting Elliot down on the floor. Shrinaman, Patrick, hello. Reg held out his hand to me. His handshake was always weak and wet, like a dead fish. How's your back? Heather said you were having trouble. It's fine, I cut him off. I hated it when people talked about my health like I was already written off. We walked into the house. Heather went straight to the kitchen to sort through the groceries, and Reg looked around with a sort of appraising gaze. Dad, I brought you your favorite cheesecakes from that bakery on Elm Street, Heather called out from the kitchen. And some more of those cooked dinners. You can heat it up in the microwave and it's ready to go. You won't have to stand at the stove. I have plenty of time to cook, I said, helping Elliot out of his jacket. And I like to cook. Grandpa makes the most delicious apple pie, Elliot said seriously. Heather rolled her eyes. Yeah, we all know about Grandpa's pie. After lunch, Heather had insisted we order pizza delivery, though I'd offered to make some myself. Reeg pulled me aside. Patrick, I'd like to take a look around the basement and attic, if you don't mind, he said, lowering his voice. Heather's worried about the state of the house, especially as winter approaches. Since when did you become a house expert? I asked, not hiding my sarcasm. Reg worked as an analyst for a technology company, and he couldn't tell a wrench from a screwdriver. I know a real estate inspector, Reg said calmly. He gave me some tips on what to look for. Why would you do that? Reg hesitated. Well, Heather's worried. We all are. You're here alone. The house is old. He paused. Besides, if you ever decide to sell, it's better to know about all the potential problems beforehand. I felt myself boiling, but I held back. There was no point in arguing. All right, take a look, I agreed. But then leave me alone with all this talk of selling. While Reg looked at the house, I played chess with Elliot in the living room. The boy was just learning, but he was catching on fast. He had an amazing concentration for a child his age, just like Ellen when she was immersed in a book. Grandfather, why does Mama talk about your house so often? Elliot suddenly asked, moving a pawn. What do you mean? She talks to Daddy about your house all the time, that it's old and... The boy frowned, remembering the words. Investment. Attractive. What does that mean? I felt a chill run down my spine. It means that your mom thinks the house is worth money, I answered cautiously, that it could be sold for a good price. Elliot nodded, as if he'd heard exactly what he'd expected. She says it will be a good place to live, that I'll have my own room on the second floor, and you'll get an apartment or... He hesitated. Or what? I don't know. They stopped talking when they saw me. I looked thoughtfully at the chessboard, so the plans were more concrete than I'd thought. Half an hour later, Reg returned from the attic, covered in dust but looking pleased. The tiles on the roof need replacing, he announced, and I noticed a leak near the chimney. I'll take a look, I dismissed him. It's nothing serious. And Patrick, Reg sat down in the chair across from me. Did you find the deed to the house? I'd like to take a look. Why? Just for information. Heather said the house was bought in the 70s, right? Maybe some of the paperwork needs updating. I stared at my son-in-law. Something in his demeanor was making me more and more uneasy. The documents are fine, I said. My lawyer checked them recently. Reg raised his eyebrows. Lawyer? I didn't know you had a lawyer. My old friend Otis Humphrey, I explained. We've known each other for almost 50 years. Reg nodded, but I noticed the change in his face. He clearly hadn't expected to hear that I had legal backing. That evening, After Elliot had fallen asleep in the guest room, Heather suggested we talk about the future. Dad, Reg and I have been doing a lot of thinking, she began, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. You're getting older, and this house is becoming too much of a burden for you. I'm doing just fine, I objected. Right now, Heather agreed, exchanging a glance with her husband. But what about a year from now? 2 years from now? The stairs are getting more and more dangerous for you. What if you fall? Who's going to help you? I have neighbors, friends. Dad, be realistic. All your friends are as old as you are. I felt anger rising up inside of me. What are you suggesting? We have a few options, Reg intervened, pulling some papers out of his briefcase. 1. You can sell the house and buy an apartment in a building with an elevator, close to us. We'll see each other more often, and it'll be easier for you to... No, I said. Okay, Reg continued, as if he hadn't heard me. The second option is that Heather, Elliot, and I move in with you. We take care of the house, and you live with us. I imagined my quiet house filling up with noise. How every minute I'd have to confront Heather and Reg, explain my actions, ask permission. No, that wasn't an option. The third option was a boarding house, Reg continued. Sunny Hills is a great place. It has medical staff, organized leisure activities, socializing with peers. You're offering me a nursing home? My voice turned icy. It's not a nursing home, Heather intervened. It's a state-of-the-art facility with nurses to change my diapers? I interrupted her. No, thank you. Heather sighed. Dad, you've always been stubborn. But this isn't about your stubbornness right now. It's about your safety. It's about your future. I'll take care of my future somehow. You can't live in denial forever. Heather's voice got higher. You're getting old. You need help. And we're offering that help. It's strange, I remarked, but until recently you weren't really interested in my health or my future. What's changed? Heather looked away. Nothing. We're just worried. Heather, Reg put his hand on his wife's shoulder. Maybe we should tell... Not now. Heather cut him off abruptly. I looked from one to the other. Tell me what? Heather took a deep breath. Dad, we're having financial problems, she finally admitted. Reg lost his job 2 months ago. We've been trying to get by on our own, but the house loan, Elliot's school, my car debt, it was all starting to make sense now. So you thought my house was the solution to your problems? Not so harsh, Dad. Heather looked hurt. We were thinking of everyone. You too. This house is too big for you. You could sell it, buy something smaller, and use the rest to live off the land. Or, we could live here together, save on rent. Or I could move to Sunny Hills and you could move into my house. I finished for her. Dad, you're taking everything personally. Heather shook her head. We're just trying to find a solution that works for everyone. We've already found a solution. I stood up from the table. I'm staying in my house, alone, and you're going to solve your problems on your own. Like adults. Heather jumped up, her face contorted with anger. You've always been selfish, always thinking only of yourself. Mom had your back, took care of everyone. And you just lived in your own little world, with your tinkering and your tools. Heather, Reg said warningly, glancing back at the stairs. Elliot might hear. Heather lowered her voice but continued, glaring at me fiercely. We're your family, the only family you have left, and you turn your back on us when we need help? I've helped you all my life, I answered calmly. Paid for your college tuition, gave you money for a down payment on your house, sat with Elliot when you went on vacation. But this, I put my hand around the room, is my house, and I'm not going to give it up. Not now, not later. Heather turned pale. You're going to regret this, she said quietly. Believe me, you will. They left the next morning, having barely eaten breakfast. Elliot looked upset. He'd expected to spend the whole weekend at my place. But Heather was adamant. She barely spoke to me, giving me one-word answers. Only at the door on her way out did she drop it. We'll come back to this conversation, Dad. I'm sure we will, I replied. After they left, I sat in the chair for a long time, looking at Ellen's picture. What would she say now? Would she approve of my refusal? Or would she reproach me for my callousness? Ellen had always been softer than me, more diplomatic. She could relate to anyone. When Heather was a teenager and we were always fighting over her late returns, her clothes, her friends, it was Ellen who acted as a peacemaker between us. Patrick, you're too strict, she'd say, stroking my arm, and then turning to her daughter. Heather, Daddy is worried about you because he loves you. Try to understand him. But now Ellen was gone, and I had to decide for myself how to deal with my daughter's demands. Until a week ago, I'd been almost certain Heather wouldn't back down. She'd never known how to lose, another trait she'd inherited from me. But now after this conversation, I realized the situation was more serious than I thought. It wasn't just about taking care of my aging father. It was about money. It was about desperation, and desperation makes people unpredictable. A few days later, on Tuesday, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting company and was surprised to see Reg on the doorstep. Patrick, he held out his hand to me. I apologized for the unexpected visit. I was driving by and thought I'd stop by. See how you're doing. I let him into the house, not hiding my suspicions. Reg never just dropped by my place. Does Heather know you're here? I asked bluntly. Reg blushed. No. I mean, she knows I was going to stop by, but... Look, Patrick, he lowered his voice. The situation is really dire. Worse than you think. We're in debt. A lot of debt. And the bank is threatening to foreclose on our house. Why didn't you tell me this before? I could have helped with the money. Heather didn't want to ask directly. Reg looked embarrassed. She has her own ideas about pride. And that's why she decided to evict me from my house? No, Reg waved his hands. We just thought it would be good for everyone. You wouldn't have to take care of the big house, and we'd have solved our problems. And Elliot would be happy living here with you. I stared at Reg in silence, trying to figure out if he really believed what he was saying or if he was just doing Heather's bidding. Look, he continued after a pause, I just want you to know that Heather is on edge. She might do something rash. She was talking about a lawyer who specializes in declaring elderly people incompetent. I got cold feet. What? Huh? I talked her out of it, Reg added quickly. But you know Heather, when she makes up her mind about something. Did you come to warn me? I asked. Reg nodded. One more thing. If you do decide to sell the house, I know a good realtor. He'll give you an honest appraisal. No shenanigans. I didn't know what to think. Was this visit Reg's attempt to help me? Or just another manipulation? Thanks for the warning, I said finally. I'll keep it in mind. After Reg left, I called Otis right away. They might try to declare me incompetent, I said without preamble when my friend answered the phone. What? Otis sounded worried. Patrick, tell me the whole story. I recounted my conversation with Heather and Reg over the weekend and my son-in-law's visit today. Otis said thoughtfully when I was done. This is serious, Patrick. They could really try. In cases like this, sadly, relatives often win, especially if they have the money for a good lawyer. What do I do? For starters, Otis's voice became businesslike. We need to prepare ourselves. Do you see a doctor regularly? Every 6 months. Last one was in July. Good, okay. Get a copy of your medical records. We need proof that you're sane and in good physical condition for your age. 2, start a diary. Write down all the strange behaviors of your daughter and son-in-law. Dates, times, details. If the case goes to trial, this will be important. And 3, don't be alone with Heather or Reg without witnesses. They may provoke you on purpose and then use your emotional reactions as evidence of instability. Do you think they're capable of that? Otis sighed. Patrick, I spent 40 years in the courtroom. I've seen people turn into monsters when it comes to inheritances, especially if they're desperate. After talking to Otis, I sat in silence for a long time, thinking about the situation. 30 years ago, I held Heather's newborn in my arms and vowed to protect her for the rest of her life. I taught her to ride her bike, helped her with her homework, took her to dances. When she went to college, Ellen and I scraped money out of the family budget to pay for her education, though it wasn't easy on my engineering salary. I remembered how proud I was of her at graduation, how happy I was when she got a job at the law firm, how I cried at her wedding, walking her down the aisle, and now this same daughter was planning to declare me incompetent to own my house? Deep down, I knew it wasn't just about the money. Over the years, a rift had formed between us. Maybe I really had been too hard on her as a child. Maybe I didn't praise her enough, didn't hug her enough. Ellen always said I didn't know how to express my feelings, but that didn't matter now. I had to protect myself, and oddly enough, to protect my daughter from her own actions, which she might later bitterly regret. The next day, I went ahead with Otis's plan, called my doctor, made an appointment. I bought a notebook for my journal, and I installed a small camera in the living room that I had ordered online. I never thought I'd spy on my own daughter, but now I felt it was a necessity. On Thursday, Heather brought Elliot over. She seemed calm, as if our conversation over the weekend hadn't happened. Only her eyes showed tension. "Dad," she said as she helped her son out of his jacket, "I was thinking, maybe Reg and I could come over on Saturday. We could help clean up, make dinner." "If you want," I answered cautiously. "Great," Heather smiled, but the smile didn't touch her eyes. "I'll see you Saturday then." When the door closed behind her, I turned to Elliot. "So, kid, what are we doing today?" Elliot bit his lip, looking at me with serious eyes, so much like Ellen's. "Grandpa," he said quietly, "Mom and Dad were talking about you last night. I shouldn't have heard, but I was scared, so I went downstairs. I knelt down in front of my grandson, despite the pain in my joints." "What were they saying, baby?" "That you," Elliot hesitated, "that you were getting weird, that you could hurt yourself, and that they needed—" He furrowed his brow, remembering, "to intervene before it's too late." I felt a chill spread through my body. So they were really going to act. "Thanks for telling me, Elliot." I hugged my grandson. "Don't worry, I'm okay, and everything's going to be okay." But I already knew it wasn't going to be okay. The war for my house was just beginning. Saturday morning greeted me with a headache and a sense of unease. I hadn't slept well the night before, waking with every creak of the old house. Elliot's words wouldn't leave my mind. They need to get involved before it's too late. What exactly were Heather and Reg planning? A lawsuit to declare me incompetent, or something else? After eating breakfast oatmeal, I set about cleaning up. Heather had promised to be here for dinner, and I wanted the house to look spotless. No sign of the strange behavior she was apparently going to talk about somewhere and to someone. I thoroughly washed the dishes, dusted all surfaces, vacuumed the carpets. When the cleaning was done, I sat down at the table and opened the notebook I'd bought on Otis's advice. Patrick Bloomfield's diary, I wrote on the first page, and I started writing down everything that had happened in the last few weeks. Heather's visits, her insistent talk about the house, Reg's confession of financial problems, Elliot's words. I tried to be as accurate as possible, noting the dates and times of each event. Finished with the notes, I checked the small camera set up in the living room. It was working properly, transmitting the image to my tablet. I never thought I'd be mastering spy technology at 73, but life is full of surprises. At exactly noon, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, prepared to meet my daughter and son-in-law. But only Reg stood on the doorstep, holding a paper bag. "Patrick," he held out his hand to me. "How are you?" Not bad," I replied, shaking his moist palm. "Where are Heather and Elliot?" "Heather got held up at work." Reg walked into the house looking around. "And Elliot is at a classmate's birthday party. I brought some groceries and thought I'd help you with lunch." I could hardly hide my surprise. Reg had never shown any interest in cooking before. He usually sat in front of the TV while Heather fiddled around in the kitchen. "Do you cook?" I asked. "A little," Reg smiled. "Ever since we've been having problems, I've taken on more domestic duties. Heather's working late, trying to make ends meet." I felt a prick of conscience. Maybe I was judging them too harshly. Maybe they were really desperate. "Okay," I nodded. "What are we going to cook?" We spent the next hour in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for the stew. Reg was unexpectedly talkative. You know, Patrick," he said, chopping carrots, "I realized that our last conversation was tense. Heather's been overreacting lately. Stress, you know?" I nodded silently. "But she's really worried about you," Reg continued. "We both do. This house needs constant upkeep. And with your back—" "There's nothing wrong with my back," I said. "Sure," Reg agreed quickly. "It's just, age takes its toll. My father had problems too. He didn't want to admit that he needed help. And eventually, Reg paused. He ended up falling down the stairs, broke his hip, lied there for hours before the neighbors found him. I knew where this conversation was going, but I decided to play along. So what's up with him now? He's in a nursing home, Reg answered. Cedar Hills in Portland. It's a great place. There's medical staff, organized recreational activities. He stopped talking when he saw the look in my eyes. I'm just saying that sometimes you have to face the truth. Recognize your limitations. You said Heather got held up at work. I changed the subject. When's she getting here? Should be here in an hour. Reg glanced at his watch. Oh, I forgot something in the car. I'll be right back. When the door closed behind him, I walked quickly into the living room and checked the camera, then returned to the kitchen, feeling my heart pounding with nervous tension. Something in Reggie's demeanor alarmed me. When he returned, he was holding a small box. Patrick, I bought you something, he said, holding it out. Open it. Inside was a brand new smartphone. Why? I asked, not hiding my suspicion. I have a cell phone. Your old button phone? Reg shook his head. It's not a phone. It's a museum piece. I thought you could use a modern model. With the big buttons, see? Specially designed for the elderly. And there's an emergency button. If you get sick, you press it, and we get a signal right away. I twirled the phone in my hands. It looked expensive. How much does it cost? Don't worry about it, Reg said. Think of it as a gift. Plus, he lowered his voice, it has GPS. If you get lost, we can always find you. Get lost in Brownsburg? I've lived here all my life. Patrick, Reg looked me straight in the eye. Sometimes people your age lose their bearings. They forget where they are. It's normal. Doesn't happen to me. I put my phone down on the table. Thanks for the gift, but I'm fine with my old phone. Reg looked disappointed. If you say so. Keep the phone, though. You never know. We went back to cooking, but the atmosphere had changed. I could feel Reg watching me, assessing my every move. When I dropped the knife, he jumped up. Careful, Patrick. You could have hurt yourself. I know, ma'am. I've been cooking for the last 60 years, I replied dryly. And so far, all my fingers are still in place. Soon, Heather arrived with Elliot. We sat down to lunch. We talked leisurely about the weather, about Elliot's school, about the news in Brownsburg. I watched my daughter and son-in-law closely. They looked at each other as if preparing for something. After lunch, Heather suggested that Elliot play in the garden. Mom, it's cold out there, he protested. Not for long, Heather insisted. Dad and Grandpa and I need to talk. An adult conversation. When Elliot reluctantly went out into the yard, Heather turned to me. Dad, Reg and I have been doing a lot of thinking since our last conversation, she began. We understand your attachment to the house, but... She paused. There are other considerations. What are they? I asked, leaning back in my chair. Your health, Heather replied. Oh, we've noticed changes in your behavior. I tensed. What kind of changes? You've become forgetful, Reg intervened. Last time you forgot where the deeds to the house were. And when we were here with Elliot a month ago, you forgot that you'd promised to take him to the park. I didn't forget, I countered. My back was hurting, so I offered to postpone the walk. Dad, Heather put her hand on mine. We know this is hard to admit. No one wants to think that their mind is changing, but it's part of aging. And the sooner we take action, the better for everyone. What kind of measures? I asked, already knowing the answer. We found a great place, Reg said. Sunny Hills, they have an active longevity program for people with early stages of dementia. I don't have dementia, I said firmly. Dad, Heather's voice became soft, almost patronizing. Everyone says that. No one notices the first signs. But we, your family, are seeing the changes, and we want to help before something serious happens. I felt anger rising inside, but I held it back. Now was not the time to get emotional. So what do you suggest? A visit to a specialist, for starters, Heather said. Dr. Finch is an excellent geriatrician. He's had experience with, cases like this. And then, I asked? Then we'll talk about options, Reg interjected. Maybe you need help with your finances, with household issues. We're ready to take care of that. I looked around at them, my daughter and son. in-law sitting across from me with concerned faces. Did they really believe what they were saying? Or was this an elaborate strategy? All right, I said at last. I'll think about your proposal. Heather brightened. Really, Dad, I'm so excited. We can make an appointment with Dr. Finch as early as next week. I said I'd think about it, I repeated. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to rest. It had been a tiring day. When they left, I sank heavily into the chair. The headache had gotten worse. They planned to act quickly, through a specialist who would undoubtedly find I had all the signs of dementia necessary to establish guardianship. The next morning, Sunday, I awoke to the doorbell ringing. The clock showed 9, an unusually early visit. Elliot stood on the doorstep, wrapped in an oversized jacket. His eyes were tearful. Elliot? I looked at my grandson in surprise. What are you doing here? Where are your parents? They're at home, the boy sobbed. I came by myself, on the bus. I pulled Elliot into the house and closed the door. On the bus? Alone? Elliot, it's dangerous. Do your parents know you're here? The boy shook his head, and a new wave of tears rolled down his cheeks. I ran away. They were fighting about you. Mom was yelling that you needed to be isolated, and Daddy said it was too soon. I felt the ground slipping away from under my feet. Isolate? Come into the kitchen, I took my grandson's hand. I'll make you some hot chocolate, and you can tell me everything in order. 15 minutes later, Elliot was sitting at the kitchen table with his palms around a cup of steaming chocolate. Grandfather, they're up to something, he said. Yesterday when we got home, Mom was on the phone for a long time. She thought I was asleep, but I went downstairs for a drink of water, and I heard... He stopped talking. Arhan, what did you hear, you little brat? I asked gently. She was talking to some doctor. Said you were becoming out of control and a danger to yourself. That you were forgetting to take your medication and leaving the gas on. Elliot looked at me wide-eyed. But that's not true, is it? You don't forget your medication, and you always turn off the gas. Of course it's not true, I stroked his head. Your mom, she's really stressed out right now. She's got money problems, job problems. Sometimes grown-ups say weird things when they're worried. And then, Elliot continued, Mom told this doctor that you'd made an appointment for Tuesday, and that everything would be on track after that. I froze. So Heather had already made the appointment with Finch without even waiting for me to decide. And another thing, Grandpa. Elliot's voice went completely quiet. Mom said that when you're in the hospital, they're going to sell the house. She was talking to some Uncle Stanley about the price. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. They didn't just want custody. They were planning to put me in some kind of clinic for a long time. And while I was there, sell my house. Elliot, I took the boy by the shoulders. Thank you for telling me. You're very brave. But now I need to call your parents. They must be worried. No, Elliot exclaimed. They'll take me away, and I won't be able to warn you anymore. Baby, you can't do that, I shook my head. You can't just run away from home. It's dangerous, and your parents have a right to know where you are. Elliot lowered his head, but didn't argue. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Heather's number. When Heather and Reg arrived, I had already prepared a cover story. Elliot missed me, I said as Heather hugged her son. He decided to surprise me and took the bus. I told him he couldn't do that. Of course you can't do that. Heather gave Elliot a stern look. Daddy and I almost went crazy with worry. I'm sorry, Mom, the boy mumbled, lowering his head. I just wanted to see Grandpa. Heather sighed and turned to me. Dad, we talked to Dr. Finch. He can see you on Tuesday, 10 o'clock in the morning. I said I'd think about it, I reminded her. Dad, there's nothing to think about. Heather shook her head. It's just a routine counseling session. It's no big deal. I looked at my daughter, her neatly styled hair, her expensive clothes, her confident demeanor. Heather always got her way, but not this time. Okay, I nodded, deciding to play along. Tuesday is Tuesday. Heather blinked in surprise. She obviously hadn't expected me to agree so easily. Great, she smiled. Then we'll pick you up at 9. When they left, taking Elliot with them, I called Otis right away. They're planning to put me in some kind of clinic, I said without preamble, and sell the house while I'm there. Shit, Otis said, which rarely happened. This is serious, Patrick. We need to act now. What do you want me to do? For starters, Otis's voice became businesslike. We need to protect your assets. Tomorrow morning, I'll come down and we'll draw up a power of attorney. Then we'll go to a notary. And also, he stopped talking. Patrick, maybe you should think about leaving temporarily. A getaway? I was stunned. Where? Anywhere. Family. Friends. As long as you're not home on Tuesday when they come for you. If you go to Finch and he gives you the right report, they can move very quickly. I sat in my chair for a long time after my conversation with Otis, thinking about the situation. A plan was beginning to form in my head. I wasn't going to run or hide. I was going to put up a fight. And to do that, I needed proof, time, and allies. Luckily, I already had the first thanks to the camera I had installed. The second I'd won by agreeing to see Dr. Finch, Heather would relax, thinking she'd won. And for the third, well, I had Otis, my loyal friend, and Elliot, my small but plucky grandson. I picked up the phone and dialed my niece Olivia's number. I would need every possible ally in this battle. Uncle Patrick? She answered in surprise after the third ring. Is something wrong? Olivia, I said, I need your help. It's about Heather, the house, and my freedom. Monday began with an early visit from Otis. My old friend arrived at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, as promised. Punctuality had always been one of his main qualities. When I opened the door, I didn't even recognize him at first. Instead of his usual tweed jacket and crumpled pants, Otis was wearing a strict dark blue suit, and he had a leather briefcase under his arm. You look like a real lawyer, I joked as I let him into the house. I am a real lawyer, Otis grinned, taking off his hat. 42 years of practice doesn't evaporate with retirement. We walked to the kitchen, where I'd already made coffee. Otis put his briefcase on the table and pulled out some documents. I've prepared a power of attorney, he said, handing me the papers. Read it carefully. This will give your attorney the authority to make medical and financial decisions on your behalf if you are declared incapacitated. I ran my eyes over the document. I'd always found the legal language too fancy, but I got the gist of it. And then who would be the trustee? You? I'd love to, Otis sighed, but you know I'm 78. The court might decide I'm not sufficiently competent. He grinned, but there was sadness in his eyes. Did you get in touch with your niece? I nodded. Called Olivia last night. Told her the situation. She's in shock. She can't believe Heather would do something like that. What did she decide? She's coming over this afternoon. She wants to discuss it in person. Otis nodded his approval. That's good. Olivia's a good choice. She's young enough, educated enough, has a steady income. The court will take her seriously. If it goes to trial, I said grimly. You have to be prepared for anything. Otis sipped his coffee. What else did Olivia say? She offered to stay with her for a while. She's got a house in Milford, only 40 minutes away. She lives alone, so there's plenty of room. That makes sense, Otis nodded. If you don't show up at Finch's appointment tomorrow, Heather will be worried, of course. But legally, there's nothing she can do. You're a grown man. You have the right to go anywhere. What about home? I asked. If I leave, they might break in, set something up. I already thought of that. Otis opened his briefcase and pulled out another document. This is a police report about your daughter and son-in-law's suspicious behavior. You describe your concerns, attach the camera footage, and ask them to patrol the neighborhood in your absence. I ran my eyes over the statement and shook my head. I don't know, Otis. That seems too much. This is my daughter, after all. Who plans to lock you up in a mental institution and sell your house? Otis reminded me. I sighed. He was right, but the thought of writing a formal complaint against my own daughter was physically painful. Let's hold off on that, I suggested. I'd talk to Olivia first, get power of attorney. Then we'll see. Otis didn't argue. Whatever you want. But remember, Patrick, in situations like this, it's best to be safe. We spent the next 2 hours discussing strategy. Otis explained my rights, told me about the procedure for recognizing a person as incapacitated, about the role of medical examinations, about the possibility of challenging a court decision. The main thing, he said when we were done, is evidence. Camera footage, your diary, witness statements, anything that proves you're sane and that Heather is acting out of self-interest. What about what Elliot overheard? I asked. Serenana, could that be used? Otis grimaced. The testimony of a 6-year-old against his own mother? Not likely. Besides, it would put the boy in a terrible position. Best to keep him out of the legal side of things. I agreed. Elliot was already caught between two fires. The grandfather he loved and the mother he depended on. I didn't want to make him choose sides in court. After Otis left, I sat down at my journal and wrote down our conversation in detail. Then I checked the camera in the living room. It was working fine. I decided to install another one in the hallway to record everyone going in and out of the house. Fortunately, there was an old webcam in the garage that I used to use for video calls with my colleagues at the plant. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. Olivia stood on the doorstep, a tall, slender woman with her brown hair in a casual bun. Despite the nearly 2-year lapse in communication, I recognized her features as my brother Norman's. The same eyes, the same stubborn chin. Uncle Patrick, she hugged me tightly. You haven't changed at all. You lie and don't blush, I grinned as I let her into the house. You've gotten older and grumpier. Olivia smiled, but her eyes remained serious. We walked into the living room, and I told her everything that had happened in the last few weeks. She listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions. I can't believe Heather would do something like that, she said when I was done. I always thought she was ambitious, but not to this extent. Financial problems change a lot of things, I sighed, plus her personality. Heather's always been stubborn. Once she's decided she wants this house, she won't stop. So what do you plan to do? Well, for starters, don't go to that Dr. Finch tomorrow. Otis thinks it's a trap. I agree, Olivia nodded. What's next? What's next? I hesitated. Olivia, are you really ready to take on the role of my confidant? It's a big responsibility. Of course, she took my hand. Uncle Patrick, you've always been good to me. When Dad died, you helped Mom with college money for me. I haven't forgotten. That was a long time ago, I brushed it off. It wasn't that long ago, Olivia smiled. Besides, you're the only family I have left. Not counting Heather, of course, but we were never close. We went over the details. Olivia confirmed that I could stay with her for as long as I needed. She worked as a middle school teacher, and classes ended at 3 in the afternoon, so I'd be alone in the house most of the day. You can leave with me tonight, she offered. Why wait until tomorrow? I shook my head. There were some things I needed to prepare. Things to pack, documents, and, I hesitated. I want to talk to my neighbor, Benson. He'll be looking after the house while I'm gone. Suit yourself, Olivia didn't insist. Then I'll pick you up tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock, okay? That'll give us an hour before Heather arrives. We agreed and Olivia left, taking with her copies of all the documents, including my diary and camera footage. I was relieved to have an ally, and the plan was taking shape. In the evening, I stopped by my neighbor Benson's house, a stout 60-year-old man with whom we'd been on good terms for 20 years. Benson listened to my story with growing indignation. These young people think they can treat us like thing, he grumbled, pouring us each a glass of whiskey. Don't worry, Patrick. I'll keep an eye on your house. No one gets in there without me knowing. Thank you, I took a sip. But be careful. Heather can be, persistent. Ha! Benson slammed his palm on the table. I spent 20 years as a bank security guard. I know how to deal with pushy people. When I got home, I started getting ready to leave. I packed the essentials, clothes, toiletries, medicines. Then I took all the important documents out of the safe. Birth certificate, military ID, insurance policy, will, house and car papers. I folded all of these neatly into a leather folder, which I hid at the bottom of my suitcase. Before I went to bed, I checked the cameras one more time. Both were working properly. Then I turned off the lights and went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I thought about Heather, about how she'd changed over the years. When had this estrangement between us begun? After Ellen died? Or earlier, when Heather had married Reg, a man I had never fully approved of? Maybe it was my own fault. I'd always been a demanding father, often criticizing Heather, rarely praising. Ellen said I was too strict, that the girl needed more encouragement than pointing out mistakes. But I only waved it off. Life was harsh, and it was better to prepare a child for that harshness than to spoil her. Now, lying in the dark, I thought, maybe Ellen was right. Maybe if I'd been gentler, shown my love more often, Heather would have grown up different, not so hard, not so calculating. But it was too late for that kind of thinking. The daughter I'd raised was now planning to get rid of me for the house and the money, and I needed to defend myself. Tuesday morning began with a phone call. The clock read 7 a.m., and I was already on my feet preparing for Olivia's arrival. "Dad, it's me." Heather's voice sounded cheerful. "Just a reminder that we're picking you up at 9. Dr. Finch's appointment is at 10. "Yeah, I remember," I answered, trying to keep my voice sounding weaker than usual. "But I didn't sleep well last night. Shall we reschedule?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What's wrong?" Heather sounded worried. "It's nothing," I coughed to make sure. "Just old age. Everything hurts. I haven't been sleeping well." "All the more reason to see a doctor," Heather said insistently. "He could prescribe you something for your insomnia." "You're probably right," I paused. "Heather, honey, could you bring me my glasses? I think I left them at your place on Sunday." "Glasses?" Heather sounded surprised. "But you never wear glasses." "My eyesight has gotten worse lately," I improvised. "I bought glasses at the drugstore a week ago. I must have left them at your place." "Okay, I'll look for them," Heather promised. "Be ready at 9. I hung up the phone, pleased with myself. Finding the non-existent glasses was going to keep Heather a little longer, which gave me extra time. Besides, the talk about feeling sick and forgetful had played into my hands. Heather was now sure I'd agree to everything she suggested. At 8:01, Olivia's car pulled into the driveway. I was already waiting at the door with a suitcase and a folder of papers. "You ready?" she asked, helping me put my things in the trunk. "As ready as I can be," I answered, taking one last look at the house. I felt like a fugitive. "You're not a fugitive," Olivia said firmly. "You're protecting yourself and your possessions. It's different." On the way to Milford, we discussed the next steps. Olivia suggested that we make an appointment with an independent doctor right away to evaluate my mental state. "We have an excellent geriatrician in Milford, Dr. Hopkins," she said. "I've already called his office. He can see you tomorrow morning." "So soon?" I wondered. I explained the situation. Besides, my ex-husband worked with him at the same clinic. "Connections help," Olivia smiled. Olivia's house was a small but cozy two-story cottage on the outskirts of Milford. White walls, blue shutters, a neat front garden. Inside it was clean and spacious, though a little impersonal, the typical dwelling of a single woman who spent more time at work than at home. "I have the guest bedroom ready for you," Olivia said, showing me to a room on the first floor. "It has its own bathroom, so you won't have to climb the stairs." "Thank you." I was touched by her concern. "I don't know how long I'll have to abuse your hospitality." "As long as it takes," Olivia said. "Now get settled in, and I'll make us some lunch before we leave for school." While Olivia rattled the dishes in the kitchen, I organized my things in the closet and checked my phone. 5 missed calls from Heather. I decided not to call back, let her worry. Instead, I texted a quick message. "I'm safe. Call you later." After lunch, Olivia left for school, and I was alone in an unfamiliar house. It was a strange feeling, after so many years in my own home, to suddenly find myself a guest. I decided to keep myself busy and continued journaling, detailing everything that had happened in the last 2 days. Around 3 in the afternoon, the phone rang. Heather. "Dad!" Her voice sounded both concerned and annoyed. "Where are you? We got to your house at 9, and there's no one home. The neighbors said they saw you leaving with a woman." "It was Olivia," I answered calmly. "My niece. I'm going to stay with her for a while." "Olivia?" Heather was clearly confused. "Why? Why didn't you tell me?" "It was a spontaneous decision," I lied. "Olivia called yesterday, offering to stay at her place. I figured, why not? I hadn't seen my niece in a while." "But you knew about Dr. Finch's appointment." Heather's voice rose. "We had an appointment." "I'm sorry." I tried to make my voice sound weak and a little confused. "I must have forgotten. You know my memory isn't what it used to be." There was a pause. I could almost see Heather exchanging glances with Reg, silently triumphant. That was it. Another proof of my incapacity. "Okay," she finally said more gently. "It's okay, Dad. We'll reschedule. In the meantime, you can rest at Olivia's. Where does she live? We could come visit." "In Milford," I said, not specifying the address. But you shouldn't come now. I'm very tired from moving. Maybe next week. Okay, Heather agreed, though I could hear the disappointment in her voice. Get some rest, and Dad, don't forget to take your meds, okay? Of course, I promised. Olivia will see to it. After talking to my daughter, I felt oddly relieved. The first phase of the plan had worked. I'd gained time and room to maneuver. Now I had to move on. Document every conversation with Heather. Gather evidence of her manipulations. And most importantly, keep playing the role of the weakening old man so she wouldn't suspect I was preparing to strike back. It had been 2 weeks since I'd moved in with Olivia. All that time, I'd continued to play the part of the wan, distracted old man during my phone calls with Heather. Each day, I made my voice more shaky, complained of forgetfulness, and confused the days of the week. And every day, Heather became more confident in her plan. Dad, are you taking the medicine Dr. Hopkins prescribed? She asked with feigned concern. What medication? I answered confused. Oh, yeah, of course. Olivia's watching. You know, I was thinking, Heather's voice was getting mellifluous. Maybe it's time for you to come home. Olivia's a sweet girl, but she's got her work and her worries. Reg and I could take care of you. Home, I said thoughtfully. Yes, I suppose you're right. I do miss my home. Good for you. Heather couldn't hide her joy. Reg and I will pick you up on Saturday, okay? Okay, honey, I agreed. I paused. There's something we need to talk about before we move. An important conversation. What kind of talk, Dad? Heather was starting to sound a little wary. About the house, I answered vaguely. About the future. You wanted me to redecorate, remember? Oh, yes, of course. Her voice was sweet again. We'll talk about it, don't worry. After these conversations, I usually turned on my tape recorder and recounted the conversation in detail. Olivia would put the notes into writing and give them to Otis, who would prepare the documents for a possible lawsuit. Meanwhile, the plan was taking shape. With Otis's help, I rewrote the will, leaving the house and most of the savings to Elliot, but with the stipulation that he would not have access to the inheritance until he was 25. Until then, everything was to be handled by a trust managed by Olivia. Heather would receive nothing but the minimum amount, just enough to prevent her from legally contesting the will. We also prepared documents proving that I'm of sound mind and good judgment. Dr. Hopkins, an independent geriatrician in Milford, performed a complete examination and issued an opinion that I showed no signs of dementia or other cognitive impairment. Benson, my neighbor, wrote testimony confirming that he had not noticed any strange behavior in me over the past few years. Even the owner of the local grocery store where I regularly bought my groceries agreed to testify in writing that I always appeared collected and adequate. Finally, we had tapes from the cameras installed in my home. These recorded conversations between Heather and Reg, in which they openly discussed plans to declare me incompetent and sell the house. On Friday night, the night before the family reunion, as Heather called it, we gathered in Olivia's living room for a final discussion. Are you sure you want to do this, Uncle Patrick? Olivia asked, pouring the tea. It's not too late to change the plan. We could just sue, provide evidence. No, I shook my head. I want to see their faces when they realize their plan has failed. I want Heather to know I was in the loop the whole time. It's personal. Otis hummed. I understand how you feel, Patrick. But be careful. Heather might try to turn the situation around, make you look unstable. Nikronma. That's why we'll be recording the entire meeting, Olivia reminded him. And that's why you and I, Otis, will be present. We went over all the details of the upcoming meeting one more time. Heather and Reg were supposed to arrive at Olivia's house by 11 o'clock Saturday morning to take me back to Brownsburg. Instead, they had a serious conversation, paperwork to prepare, and, I hoped, the realization that their plan had been doomed to failure from the start. Saturday morning was unusually sunny for October. I woke up early, feeling strangely calm. Over the past 2 weeks, I'd thought a lot of thoughts and experienced a whole range of emotions, from anger and resentment to deep sadness. But all I felt today was determination. Determination to put an end to this ugly story. Olivia had prepared a hearty breakfast of scrambled eggs and bacon, toast, and freshly brewed coffee. You need your strength today, she said, sliding me another piece of toast. Emotional confrontations are just as exhausting as physical ones. Otis arrived at 10:30, punctual as always. He was carrying a bulky leather briefcase full of documents. We checked once more the dictaphones and the camera we'd set up in the living room. Everything was ready. At exactly 11 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Olivia went to open it, and Otis and I stayed in the living room. I sat in a chair that gave me a good view of the entrance and waited. "Heather, Reg, come in." I heard Olivia's voice from the hallway. "Uncle Patrick is waiting for you in the living room." "Olivia?" Heather's voice sounded strained. "I didn't know you'd be here. We thought we'd pick up Dad and go right away." "Oh, we have a lot to discuss before we leave," Olivia replied easily. "Come in and make yourself at home." When Heather entered the living room, her face changed. She saw Otis sitting at the table with his papers spread out and stopped. "What's going on?" she asked, shifting her gaze from me to Otis. Dad, what does this mean?" "Have a seat," I pointed to the couch across the table. "We have a really important conversation, as I promised." Heather hesitated, but then walked over and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. Reg stomped uncertainly to the door. "Reg, you sit down too," I said. "It's for both of you." When they were settled on the couch, I took a deep breath and began. "Heather, Reg, over the past few months, I've been watching your actions. The way you've gradually tried to convince me that I'm losing my mind. How you've made plans to have me declared incompetent and placed in Sunny Hills while you sell my house." "What?" Heather straightened up. "Dad, what are you talking about? We just wanted to help you. You're the one who complained about forgetfulness, about your health problems." "No, Heather," I shook my head. "I never complained. You were the one who kept telling me that I forgot to turn off the stove, that I lost my papers, that I couldn't manage my finances. But none of that was true." "Dad, you're not yourself right now," Heather threw a quick glance at Reg. "Your paranoia only confirms our fears." "That's exactly what I'm talking about." I nodded to Otis, and he turned on the tape. Heather's voice came out of the speaker. "When he's in the hospital, we'll sell the house quickly. Stanley says he can find a buyer in a week. And if Dad resists, Dr. Finch will help us with the incapacity papers." Heather's face went pale. "What is this? You've been recording our conversations? That's illegal." "Not exactly," Otis replied calmly. The recording was made at Patrick's house with the help of surveillance cameras he installed for his own safety. It's perfectly legal in the state. It was a private conversation in someone else's house." Heather was outraged. "In my house," I corrected, "and I had every right to know what was going on in it." Heather stood up abruptly. "Dad, I don't know what Olivia told you, but all we really wanted to do was help. Yes, we may have discussed selling the house, but only because it's too big for you alone. We were thinking of getting you something smaller, more comfortable, and keep some of the money to help you with your financial problems," I finished for her. "Heather, I know Reg lost his job. I know you're in debt. I know the bank is threatening to foreclose on your house. But that doesn't justify trying to cheat your own father. We're not—" Reg started to say, but Heather cut him off. "Shut up!" She turned to me. "Yes, we're having money problems. And yes, we thought some of the proceeds from the sale of the house might help. But we were really worried about you. You live alone in a big old house. Your health is failing." "My health is perfectly fine." I pulled Dr. Hopkins' report out of the folder and handed it to Heather. "A complete physical exam, done a week ago. No signs of dementia, no cognitive impairment. I'm of sound mind and memory, Heather." She picked up the document, quickly glanced through it, and tossed it on the table. "It doesn't prove anything. One doctor says one thing, another doctor says another. Dr. Finch?" "Dr. Finch is your accomplice," I interrupted. "A man who, for a price, is willing to write any report he wants." "Yes, Heather, I know that too." Heather clenched her fists. "What do you want, Dad? Why all the drama?" "I want you to know that I'm aware of your plans. All of them." I looked her straight in the eye. "And I have proof. Taped conversations, witness statements, medical reports. If you try to file a petition to have me declared incompetent, I'll submit all of this to the court. And then you'll have to explain why you lied about your father's condition." "Are you threatening us?" Heather laughed, but there was no mirth in her laughter. "To your own daughter?" "I'm protecting myself," I replied calmly, "from the daughter who wanted to lock me in a mental institution and sell my house." There was a heavy pause. Reg sat with his head down and slouched as if he wanted to disappear. Heather stood with her shoulders squared, looking at me defiantly. "What's next?" she finally asked. "Are you going to sue us? Disgrace your own family?" "No," I shook my head. "I'm not going to sue. If you leave me alone, if you stop trying to incapacitate me or take over my house, I won't take any legal action." "So you just want us out of your life?" Heather asked bitterly. "Throw away your only daughter and grandchild?" "Don't be manipulative," I said harshly. "Elliot will always be welcome. As for you and Reg, we need time. A lot of time." I pulled another document out of the folder and placed it in front of Heather. "What's this?" she asked, not touching the paper. "My new will," I answered. "I've transferred the house and most of my savings to Elliot. He'll have access to the inheritance when he turns 25. Until then, the trust fund under Olivia's direction will manage everything." Heather turned even paler. "What about me?" she asked quietly. "What did you leave me?" $50,000, I answered. "Enough to keep you from contesting the will on the grounds that I'd forgotten to mention my only daughter." $50,000? Heather laughed bitterly. "After all I've done for you? After all the years of caring?" "What years of caring, Heather?" I felt the anger I'd been holding back all this time start to break through. "You've barely visited me since Mom died. You only came when you needed something. And you've spent the last few months trying to convince me that I'm going crazy." "You've always been like this," Heather shouted. "Always thinking I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't up to your standards. Even now when we're desperate, when we could lose the roof over our heads, you only think about yourself." "I think about justice," I replied quietly. "If you came to me and told me honestly about your problems, I would help. I always have. But you chose to manipulate, to deceive, to use my age against me. That's, unforgivable, Heather." There was a heavy silence. Heather looked at me, and in her eyes I saw a mixture of anger, resentment, and something else. Fear. "We're leaving," she finally said, tugging on Reg's sleeve. "This conversation is over." "Not yet." I pulled the last document out of the folder. "This is an agreement that you recognize me as legally competent and waive any claim to my house or other property during my lifetime. In exchange, I take no legal action against you for attempted fraud. Is that what you want us to sign?" Heather shook her head incredulously. "Now?" "Yes," I held out a pen to her. "It's a guarantee that our conversation today wasn't a waste of time." Heather looked at Reg, who nodded faintly. "Good." She grabbed the pen and quickly signed the document without even reading it. Then she held it out to Reg, and he signed it as well. "Here." She tossed the paper on the table. "Happy? Did you get what you wanted?" "Not really," I shook my head. "I wanted a daughter I could trust, but apparently that wasn't possible." Heather turned away sharply, hiding her face, but I could see a tear slip down her cheek. "Let's go, Reg," she said quietly. "There's nothing more for us to do here." They headed for the exit, but Heather stopped at the door and turned to me. "What about Elliot?" she asked. "You say you want to see him, but how? After all this," I wondered. Really, how could I maintain a relationship with my grandson after such an open conflict with his parents? I would visit him at school, I decided, or meet him in neutral places, parks, museums, cafes, without you and Reg present. "We can forbid those meetings," Heather objected. "We're his parents." "You can," I agreed. "But what are you going to tell your son? That Grandpa can't see him anymore because you tried to lock him up in a mental institution? Because you wanted to take his house? Elliot's a smart boy, Heather. He'll understand." Heather bit her lip, clearly struggling with her emotions. "You always know where to hit, don't you, Dad? You always know where it hurts the most." "I taught you to be honest," I said, "and to take responsibility for your actions. It's too bad you didn't learn those lessons." Heather didn't say anything. She just turned and walked out. Reg followed her without looking up. When the door closed behind them, there was a heavy silence in the room. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange emptiness inside. I had won, but it was a bitter victory. "Are you okay, Uncle Patrick?" Olivia asked quietly, coming toward me. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I'd just broken things off with my only daughter. That could hardly be called okay." "You did what you had to do." Otis put his hand on my shoulder. They left you no choice. Maybe, I sighed. But now, what's next? Next, we file these papers with the court. Otis started picking up papers from the table. Legally, you're protected now. Heather won't be able to make another attempt without serious consequences for herself. What about my house? I asked. Can I come back? Of course, Olivia nodded. If you want to. Or you can stay here for a while. Whatever's more comfortable, I wondered. I didn't want to go back to an empty house full of memories, but it didn't feel right to overstay my welcome either. I think I should go back, I said finally. This is my home, the place where Ellen and I had lived our whole lives. I'm not going to let Heather take that away from me, too. Then I'll drive you, Olivia offered. Tonight, if you want. No, I shook my head. No, I shook my head. Let's do it tomorrow. Tonight I need to be alone. Olivia nodded understandingly and left the room. Otis left too, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat in the chair for a long time, staring out the window at the fall garden. The trees had already shed most of their leaves, preparing for winter. I too was facing a kind of winter, a time of solitude, a time of rethinking. I thought of Heather, of her last words. You always know where to strike. Maybe she was right. Maybe I really had been too tough of a father, too demanding, too stingy with praise. Ellen always said I didn't know how to express my feelings. Patrick, she used to say, a girl needs to know you love her, not just through actions, but through words. But I brushed it off. I believed that caring about a roof over my head, about my daughter's education, about her future, was an expression of love, that words were worthless. Now I realized how wrong I'd been. Words mattered. The hugs I had so sparingly given mattered. The I'm proud of you that I almost never said mattered. Maybe if I had been a different father, Heather would have grown up to be a different daughter. Maybe she wouldn't have become so tough, so calculating. But it was too late for those musings. It was too late. There was a chasm between us, and I saw no bridge that could bridge it. The only bright spot was Elliot, my grandson, so much like Ellen. In him I saw hope, a continuation, and I would do anything not to lose touch with him, despite my breakup with Heather. I sighed and closed my eyes. The revenge plan was done. Heather and Reg had gotten what they deserved. I had protected myself and my property. But the victory left a bitter taste. Ellen, I thought, looking up at the sky, would you have approved of what I did? Or would you have found another way? I would never know the answer to that question, but in my heart I was sure that Ellen would have understood me. She would have understood and forgiven both Heather and me, because she'd always known how to forgive. That ability made her stronger than any of us. It had been 3 months since that memorable day when I laid my cards on the table in front of Heather and Reg. Winter was in full force, covering the Brownsburg with a thick layer of snow. My office window overlooked the snow-covered garden, the same one where Ellen had once grown her famous roses, where little Heather had played hide-and-seek, where I now spent time with Elliot, making snowmen and having snowball fights. Heather hadn't called or visited since our last meeting. Through Olivia, I learned that my daughter and her husband were in a difficult financial situation. They had to sell their car and some of their possessions to keep the house. Reg had taken a lower-paying job, and Heather had taken on extra hours at the law firm. Life wasn't easy, but they were getting by, without my help. Sometimes I caught myself thinking I could have reached out, offered money. After all, Heather was still my daughter, despite everything that had happened. But something stopped me. Pride, perhaps. Perhaps fear that any help would be seen as weakness, as an admission of guilt. And I didn't feel guilty. At least not the way Heather accused me of. That wasn't the case with Elliot. Contrary to my fears, Heather hadn't forbidden our meetings. Maybe out of fear of the legal consequences. Maybe out of reluctance to explain to her son the reasons for the ban. Either way, I was grateful. Every Wednesday and Saturday, I would pick Elliot up from school, and we would spend a few hours together. At the park, at the museum, over pizza at his favorite pizza place, Tony's. Elliot never asked directly about what had happened between me and his parents, but I could feel his unspoken questions, see the curiosity in his eyes. "Grandpa," he said one day as we sat at a table in an ice cream parlor, "why don't you come to our house anymore?" I set the spoon aside, mulling over the answer. Lying was the easiest thing to do, but I'd never lied to my grandson. You see, kid, I said at last, grown-ups fight sometimes. Like you and your friend Austin last month, remember? You couldn't decide who was going to be captain of the game. But Austin and I made up, Elliot said, licking his ice cream spoon. It's more complicated with adults, I sighed. Sometimes it takes longer. Sometimes, some things are hard to forgive. Mom says you're mad at her. Elliot looked at me with serious blue eyes so similar to Ellen's. Because of the house. It's not about the house, kid, I ruffled his hair. It's about trust. Once you lose it, it's hard to get it back. Elliot nodded thoughtfully, as if he really knew what I was talking about. Sometimes I thought he was wiser than most adults at 6.5. But you're not mad at me, are you? He asked, and there was a twinge of concern in his voice. Never, I hugged him tightly. This has nothing to do with you. Do you hear me? Whatever happened between me and your parents has nothing to do with how I feel about you. Elliot pressed himself against me, and in that moment, I felt a prick of conscience. No matter how I justified my actions, my conflict with Heather was casting a shadow over this child's life. When I returned home after these encounters, I often wondered if I was doing the right thing by continuing to live in the house that had caused so much strife. Maybe I should have just sold it, as I had planned in moments of anger, split the money and started over. But every time I crossed the threshold, I felt Ellen's presence. In the creak of the floorboards, in the smell of old wood, in the sunlight streaming through the stained glass window in the hallway. This house is our history, she'd once said, and I couldn't just turn that page. But slowly the thought of moving did begin to take root in my mind. Not because of Heather, not out of fear or resentment, but simply because the house was getting too big for one person, too full of memories, too empty without the voices of those I loved. In mid-January, I finally made a decision. I called a realtor, not the Stanley that Heather had contacted, but an older woman named Dorothy that Otis had recommended. Dorothy appraised the house for more than I expected and suggested several options for purchase. You need something smaller but cozy, she said, flipping through a catalog. Maybe an apartment in the new retirement complex? It has a pool, a gym, common living rooms for gatherings. I shook my head. The thought of living among old people like me, surrounded by nurses and social workers, was too reminiscent of the sunny hills Heather had planned for me. No, I said firmly. I want a small house, with a garden, in a quiet neighborhood, but not a retirement ghetto. Dorothy smiled understandingly. I've got something in mind. A small cottage in Riverside, a new neighborhood across the river, 2 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, garage, and a very nice garden, though small. The next day, we went to see the house. Riverside was exactly as Dorothy had described. A quiet green neighborhood with neat streets and well-kept houses. The cottage was at the end of a dead-end street next to a small park. It was much smaller than my current home, but more than adequate for one person. Bright rooms, large windows, a modern kitchen, and most importantly, no ghosts of the past, no painful memories. I'll take it, I said as soon as we finished looking around. When can we make a deal? Dorothy was surprised at my determination, but quickly pulled herself together. I still have to find a buyer for your house, she reminded me, but I can reserve the cottage for you. The owners are in no hurry to sell. Excellent, great. I shook her hand. Then let's start the process. When I got home, I felt light for the first time in a long time. The decision had been made. The path had been chosen. Now all I had to do was pack my things, deal with the legacy of the past, and move forward. I decided not to tell Heather about my plans to sell the house. Let her find out after the fact, when everything was settled. I did, however, let Olivia know. As Elliot's confidant, she needed to know what was going on with his future inheritance. Are you sure, Uncle Patrick? She asked when I told her of my decision. This house means so much to you. That's exactly why I want to sell it, I replied. Too many memories, too much pain. It was time to move on. Olivia nodded understandingly. What about the money from the sale? Part of it will go to buy a new house and make improvements. I shrugged. The rest will go into a trust fund for Elliot, just like we'd planned. And Heather? Olivia asked cautiously. You don't think... No, I shook my head. Nothing had changed. She'll get her 50,000, just as it says in the will. No more, no less. Olivia didn't argue, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. She'd always been softer than me, always believed in reconciliation, just like Ellen. In the weeks that followed, my house became a hive of activity. I took things apart, sorting through them, deciding what to take with me and what to leave behind. Old furniture, books, dishes, tools that had accumulated over half a century. I didn't realize how much stuff was piled up in closets and in the attic. Olivia helped on weekends, and on weekdays, Mrs. Pierce, an energetic woman in her 60s, came in to clean and help sort things. She was not only a great helper, but also a pleasant conversationalist. My husband was an engineer too, she said one day as we were sorting through my old tools. Only he worked with electronics, not metal. He died 10 years ago, of a heart attack. I sympathize. I looked at her sincerely. My Ellen passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. Mrs. Pierce, Barbara, as she asked me to call herself, nodded understandingly. The first few years are the hardest. Then it gets, not easier, but different. You learn to move on. Yes, I agreed. That's why I decided to sell the house. A fresh start in a way. A wise decision, Barbara smiled. You know, I sold our house after Howard died too. Moved to an apartment closer to my daughter. It was scary at first, but then it was freeing. It was like a new chapter opened up. I looked closely at this woman who seemed to understand my feelings so well. Her brown eyes glowed with the wisdom of life, and her smile lacked the falseness so common in expressions of condolence. Barbara, I said impulsively, perhaps we could have tea sometime. Not here, but in town, for instance. She blinked in surprise, but then smiled. I'd love to, Mr. Bloomfield. Patrick, I corrected. Just Patrick. So suddenly I had another person in my life to help me move forward. Barbara and I began to see each other. First for tea in the town cafe, then for walks in the park, then for movies and concerts by the local orchestra. She wasn't a substitute for Helen. No one could replace the woman I'd lived with for almost 50 years. But she gave me what was missing in my life. Warmth, understanding, the ability to share my thoughts. By the beginning of March, I found a buyer for my house, a young family with 2 children who fell in love with the spacious rooms, large garden, and stained glass windows. Seeing their delight, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and contentment. This house deserved to be filled again with children's laughter, family dinners, and love. The deal was done quickly. Dorothy was an excellent realtor. She took care of all the formalities, helped with the paperwork, and organized the move. On the last day of March, I walked through the empty rooms for the last time, saying goodbye to every corner, every memory. Goodbye, I whispered, standing in the bedroom where Ellen had died. Thank you for everything. Moving to a new home was less painful than I'd expected. The cottage in Riverside was bright, cozy, with a modern layout that was more comfortable than I thought it would be. The large windows looked out onto a small but well-maintained garden where the first spring flowers were already beginning to bloom. The first Saturday after I moved in, I invited Elliot over to see the new place. Wow, he exclaimed, running through the rooms. You have a dishwasher and a TV in the bedroom. Is that a video game console? Yeah, I smiled. I thought it would give you something to do when you came to stay with me. Elliot's face brightened. So I can stay the night? My mom wouldn't let me at the old house. You're always welcome here, I hugged my grandson. Your room is upstairs, second door on the right. Elliot rushed upstairs and I stayed downstairs, feeling the warmth in my chest. A new home, new memories, a new life. Heather found out about the sale of the house a week after I moved in. I hadn't informed her, but Elliot had told her about Grandpa's new place, of course. She called Sunday night, the first time in months. You sold the house, she said without preamble. Our family home. Yes, I replied quietly. It had gotten too big for me alone. There was a pause. I could almost see her struggling with her emotions, choosing her words. And you didn't think to tell me? She finally asked. Should I have? I answered her question with a question. After everything that had happened? I'm your daughter. Heather's voice trembled. Your only daughter. I grew up in this house. It's where all my memories of my mom are. I felt a prick of conscience. In my resentment, I hadn't realized that this house could mean as much to Heather as it did to me. Not because of the financial value, but because of the emotional attachment. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "You're right, I should have told you." Heather clearly hadn't expected such an answer. "What? What did you do with the money?" she asked after a pause. I sighed. Of course, in the end, it all came down to money. "Some of it went into buying a new house," I answered dryly. "The rest in a trust fund for Elliot, as planned." "What about me?" Heather's voice grew hard. "What did you leave me, Father?" "Nothing," I answered honestly. "It's just like the will. Elliot gets the bulk of it, and you get 50,000 after I die." "Do you really hate me that much?" There was so much bitterness in Heather's voice that I felt my heart clench. "Ha, I don't hate you, Heather," I said quietly. "You're my daughter and I love you. I always have. But I don't trust you. Not after what you tried to do." "I was trying to help," she exclaimed. "Yes, perhaps in the wrong ways, but I was really worried about you. And yes, we needed the money, but you chose deception over honest conversation," I finished for her. "You chose manipulation over asking for help. If you had come to me and told me the truth, if you had just asked—" "You would have said no," Heather interrupted. "You always said that we should solve our own problems, that we shouldn't rely on other people's help." I wondered, was I really that tough? Had I refused help so often that Heather thought cheating was the only way to get support? "I don't know what I would have said," I admitted. But we'll never know because you didn't give me a chance to answer. You decided right away that I was an enemy to be outsmarted." There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line. "What now?" Heather finally asked. "Are we going to live like strangers?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "We both need time. Maybe someday. Maybe we can start over." "I'd like that, Dad." Heather's voice softened. "No matter what." Something had changed after that conversation. Not immediately, not dramatically, but the ice had been broken. Heather began to call occasionally, not often, once every 2 or 3 weeks. The conversations were short, a little awkward, but they were no longer accusatory. We talked about Elliot, the weather, neutral things. Didn't touch on the past, didn't discuss the future, just socializing. By summer, I was fully settled into my new home. I planted a vegetable garden in the backyard where I grew tomatoes and cucumbers, planted a few rose bushes in memory of Ellen, made friends with his neighbors, an elderly Thompson couple on the left and a family with 3 children on the right. He played chess at the local club on Tuesdays, attended art classes at the community center on Thursdays. And he met with Barbara several times a week, for walks, dinners, sometimes just to sit next to her, feeling the warmth of another person. Elliot came every weekend, sometimes staying from Friday through Sunday. His room gradually filled with his things: books, toys, drawings on the walls. We cooked dinner together, played board games, watched old movies that I loved when I was younger. One day in early July, while Elliot and I were barbecuing in the backyard, the doorbell rang. I went to open it and froze when I saw Heather on the doorstep. "Hi, Dad," she said tentatively. "I'm sorry for the unexpected visit. I came to pick up Elliot early. We're having a family dinner at Grandma Caldwell's." "Of course," I stepped back, letting her into the house. "We're just about to barbecue. Do you want to join us while Elliot packs up?" Heather hesitated, clearly surprised by the invitation. Yeah, yeah, I guess so." We went out into the yard where Elliot was fiddling with skewers. When he saw his mother, he froze for a moment, as if he didn't know what was happening, but then he brightened. "Mom, look, Grandpa and I are barbecuing. I marinated the meat myself." "Chef, I see," Heather smiled. "It looks delicious." We sat in the backyard eating Elliot's barbecue, talking about his schoolwork, Reggie's new job, the neighbors. We didn't touch on painful topics, didn't reminisce about the past, didn't make plans for the future. Just being together for the first time in months. When it was time to leave, Heather lingered at the door. "Dad," she said quietly as Elliot gathered his things in his room, "I like your new house. It's cozy." "Ah, thank you," I nodded. "I like it too. And you look happier," she paused. "Is it because of that woman, Barbara?" "Elliot told me she's been coming over a lot." I felt myself blush like a teenager caught on a date. "Barbara's a good friend," I said evasively. "She helps me move on." Heather nodded. I'm happy for you, Dad. I really am. And in that moment, I realized she meant it. No sarcasm, no hidden reproach. Just a daughter who wants her father to be happy. Thank you, I said. And for the first time in a long time, I looked at her not as an adversary, but as a relative who, despite all the mistakes, holds a special place in my heart. When they left, I stood on the doorstep for a long time, staring after them. Heather was holding Elliot's hand, listening to him talk excitedly about something, and laughing from time to time. Her laughter through the summer air reminded me of the time when she was a little girl, and I was a young father ineptly trying to weave a ribbon through her hair. Maybe, I thought as I walked back into the house, maybe not all is lost. Maybe in time. I didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in many months, I felt hopeful. Not just for reconciliation with my daughter, but for something more. For peace, for happiness, for a new chapter of the life I had begun to write at 73. That evening, I sat on the porch for a long time, watching the sun slowly sink below the horizon. Thought about the path I'd traveled, from fear and anger to acceptance and new possibilities. Thought about Heather, about Elliot, about Barbara, about those who made up the new mosaic of my life. Ellen, I mentally turned to my wife, looking up at the stars beginning to make their way across the sky. I think you'd approve. You've always said that one should be able to forgive and move on. That life's too short for resentment. I'm trying, love. I'm really trying. And I thought the light evening breeze that touched my face was her answer.